Hey there, welcome back to John's Sword Discovery. We're going to talk about can openers of a sort. Yes, that's right, late medieval percussive weapons. They came in many forms, such as the two you see here. Here in my left hand, a Gothic mace, in my right hand, a form of late medieval, you may say Gothic, single-handed axe, or battle axe. Very much in this sense intended for cavalry due to the short length, but some infantry and other troop types may have used them too. These certainly proliferated late in the Middle Ages, after the 14th century mainly, and then in the 15th century one could say they really came into their own, especially when you have forms like these, which are essentially all metal, all iron or steel. And they really excelled at their primary function, which was to oppose and try to defeat the plate armor that had become prevalent during that time. And by and large, they were quite effective at that. You can see in this example here, the spike or fluke at the back, very much a penetrative thing, with the intent being to either get through gaps of armor or perhaps even pierce directly sections of plate in some instances. And of course the namesake, the main edge, cutting axe edge, in this case a more rare and unusual sort of recurved S shape. In contrast, the mace here, entirely percussive with the intent on crushing and breaking, which you could often do the bones and soft tissue of the man himself through the armor and the arming jacket or padded garments that were worn under full and in some cases partial plate harnesses. And this certainly had the capability of doing that to an extent that many other melee weapons or hand weapons really weren't up to the task, more often than not, when facing someone wearing full plate. So these certainly excelled during their time when they arose and came to prominence, and were very often wielded, and probably wielded with a fair amount of effect as well. These are one of those interesting things where you look into the bigger picture and you can see these being aspects of what some dub the late medieval arms race, and these were certainly just two small factors of that. These came in many varieties and styles. These probably constitute the three main groups of these, both for longer two-handed and shorter single-handed weapons, the axe, the mace, and the third main group being warhammers, of course, which we'll discuss a little bit later in possibly another video. But yeah, for now, as an overview, these two are windlass made. This one definitely is based on an original, I believe, possibly in the Wallace collection. We'll have to double check on that. Blackened, I believe the original was also used a form of period blackening with some brass accents, actually leather wrapped, but all metal, iron or steel in the original, and some form of steel here. In this case, probably also loosely based on the few originals we have, with of course the all metal shank. During the period they also had wooden versions, wooden halves, which of course were used on their earlier counterparts, still used much later, even into the 15th, 16th, 17th century, as long as these were used. In some cases slightly later in places like Eastern Europe among the Poles, with slight different variations in shape and form. But yes, very effective and handy in their primary method of use. And then of course auxiliary troops, some infantry would also use these in different capacities and at certain times during that era. But certainly for horsemen, with one hand on the reins and managing the horse, these were very handy as a primary anti-armor weapon, and for use against other troops as well, though they would have also usually had a sword and other backup or secondary weapons, or as a proper knight or men-at-arms, as they would have said. And of course the primary weapon or tactic would have always been the lance and variations of the couch lance technique, though of course as the late medieval period and early Renaissance into the 15th, and then of course going into the 16th century progressed, heavy cavalry charges became less and less common. They were still used and occasionally used to some effect, but not as they were even a few decades, much less a century or so earlier. They were definitely going on to decline for the most part in most of Western Europe as tactics began to change. And of course infantry tactics with mass pike formations and early firearms begin to gradually go from before, where they had sort of a more or less even balance, you could maybe say, to where the infantry tactics started to take dominance at least, and then certain primary cavalry tactics such as the couch lance and its various iterations began to decline as the infantry methods began to have an ascendancy over them. So you still had them, but they were definitely in decline for a large part, especially in large mass charges after about the end of the 15th century, perhaps before in some areas, but once the early 16th century, early 1500s started rolling on, there was definitely mass decline, especially as firearm formations and units began to advance more and more. Okay, so that's all for now. This may be a permanent or maybe a test, we will see, but for now, give you a good look, and we'll probably have these featured in a future video. That's all. Bye-bye. Oh, please like and subscribe if you will. Thank you.